Hello, everyone. The world stage has seen a whirlwind of activity lately, and today on our channel, we're diving deep into a story that intertwines corporate strategy, international trade disputes, and the very backbone of American agriculture. It involves iconic brands, presidential policies, and consequences rippling through communities and global markets. We're talking about John Deere's significant shift in production, former President Donald Trump's sharp response, and the broader implications these events have unveiled, including impacts on the automotive and aerospace sectors. This narrative is complex, touching upon tariffs, competition, technological advancements, and the resilience of industries facing unprecedented pressures. We'll explore the sequence of events, the economic fallout, and the strategic maneuvers by global players. Stick with us as we unpack this multifaceted situation, and remember, we'll be drawing some crucial conclusions at the end of the video. Before we delve deeper, if you find our analysis insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support is vital for us to continue bringing you in-depth reports like this one. Also, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our global audience. Let's begin with John Deere and the unexpected shift. For nearly 2 centuries, since its founding in 1837, John Deere has stood as an irreplaceable symbol of American agriculture. The company didn't just manufacture farming equipment, it embodied the resilience and advancement of rural communities across the nation. Its machinery wasn't merely tools, but represented a legacy of progress deeply woven into the fabric of American farming life. Generations of farmers relied on John Deere, viewing it not just as a supplier, but as a partner in their demanding profession. However, earlier this year, John Deere startled the nation by announcing the closure of multiple U.S. factories and the relocation of corresponding production lines to Mexico. The objectives behind this move were articulated clearly by the company: to reduce operational costs, thereby increasing returns for shareholders, and to maintain competitiveness within the demanding global market. This decision, driven by economic rationale from the company's perspective, marked a significant departure from its long-standing American-centric manufacturing identity, sending ripples of concern through the agricultural sector and beyond. Please watch this video until the end, as we will be making important conclusions. The consequences of John Deere's strategic relocation were severe and immediate. Over 7,000 workers found themselves jobless in the first quarter alone, a stark figure representing the human cost of the corporate shift. Entire towns, economically dependent on Deere's factories, spiraled into recession. The withdrawal of a major employer created a vacuum, leading to widespread economic hardship. Local businesses, ranging from diners to repair shops, which thrived on the activity generated by the factories and their employees, were forced to shut down due to a drastic loss of foot traffic and overall economic decline. This wasn't merely about jobs being lost. It was about the unraveling of entire communities, illustrating the profound interconnection between large-scale manufacturing and local economies. In response to this development and the intense backlash emanating from key farming states, areas where he had previously received significant support from rural voters, former President Donald Trump reacted swiftly and dramatically. During a speech delivered in Pennsylvania, Trump addressed the situation head-on. He directly notified John Deere, stating that if the company proceeded with its relocation plans, his administration would impose a staggering 200% tariff on every single product the company intended to sell back into the United States. The message seemed unequivocally clear: punish companies that move jobs overseas. This threat was a core component of his America First policy, a stance he had consistently championed, promising to protect American jobs and industries from foreign competition and offshoring practices. Trump reiterated this position fiercely, threatening a 200% tariff on John Deere products manufactured in Mexico, framing the company's decision as a betrayal hurting American farmers and manufacturing. He insisted that companies like John Deere should build their plants within the United States, ideally in states like Michigan or South Carolina, promising substantial tariffs on products made across the border. However, in reality, this measure, or the threat thereof, produced a counterproductive effect. The price of a John Deere tractor, which initially hovered around $60,000, skyrocketed to over $100,000 within just a few months. This dramatic price inflation occurred because products imported from the newly established Mexican facilities now constituted nearly 70% of the new production volume. Consequently, American farmers, many already grappling with significant financial pressures from other market forces, were forced to bear the brunt of this substantial cost increase. The intended punitive measure against offshoring inadvertently placed a heavier burden on the very constituency it aimed to protect. This confluence of events led to a significant reaction from the farming community, culminating in widespread boycotting of John Deere products. Farmers faced not only escalating costs for essential equipment, but also felt a profound sense of betrayal. For generations, their loyalty to John Deere was based not merely on product quality, but also on a perceived commitment to an American-made brand. When John Deere seemed to abandon this principle by moving production, the response wasn't characterized by loud protests, but by a quiet yet deliberate action: a boycott. In crucial farming states such as Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, a noticeable shift occurred as farmers began turning to alternative brands like Kubota, Ajco, and Case IH. These competitors were often perceived as having more flexible repair policies, better accessibility, and importantly, did not impose the software control restrictions that John Deere had implemented. The iconic green deer logo, once a ubiquitous symbol on farms, began to vanish from barns, trucks, and farm signs. Sales for John Deere dealerships in the Midwest plummeted by up to 40%. A longtime dealer in Iowa shared the harsh reality: "We lost more than half of our loyal customers in just 6 months. No one believed this was happening." Compounding the crisis sparked by rising equipment costs in the John Deere situation, crop prices began moving in the opposite direction. As production costs surged, the value farmers received for their output declined sharply. Data illustrates this stark trend. From 2022 to mid-2024, corn prices dropped by 37%, soybeans saw a 24% decrease, and wheat lost up to 35% of its value. The reasons for this downturn were multifaceted, stemming from global oversupply conditions, the disruptive effects of climate change on yields, and reduced export demand resulting from international trade barriers and tariff wars. For small farms operating with already narrow profit margins, this decline proved to be a fatal blow. According to USDA data, the situation became dire. More than 30% of family farms under 100 acres went bankrupt within just 3 years. This bankruptcy rate was alarming, reaching levels not witnessed since the Great Depression of the 1930s, highlighting the extreme vulnerability of smaller agricultural operations in the current economic climate. This cascade of challenges signifies more than just a domestic issue. It underscores a concerning trend where U.S. agriculture is losing its global competitive edge. As production costs within the United States continue to rise, driven by factors like equipment prices, labor, and inputs, the nation becomes less competitive compared to agricultural powerhouses such as Brazil, India, and various European nations. These competing countries often benefit from stronger government subsidies supporting their farmers and more aggressive modernization and mechanization efforts, which help keep their production costs lower. This growing disparity puts American farmers at a significant disadvantage in the international marketplace, making it harder for them to compete on price and potentially leading to a long-term erosion of the U.S. position as a leading global agricultural producer. Does America have a chance to recover from this agricultural downturn? The answer hinges on 3 critical factors. Firstly, the federal government needs to step up significantly. This involves increasing credit availability and subsidy support, specifically targeted at small and medium-sized farms, which are currently the most vulnerable. Such measures are essential to prevent these vital operations from being overwhelmed by debt and forced into bankruptcy. Secondly, a renewed focus on investing in domestic production and strengthening local supply chains is crucial. Reducing reliance on foreign imports for essential inputs and equipment can mitigate risks associated with global disruptions and trade disputes, bolstering the resilience of the American agricultural sector. Finally, trade policies require careful adjustment. This means working towards creating more sustainable bilateral and multilateral agreements that minimize the risks stemming from tariff wars, while simultaneously increasing access for American agricultural products in global markets. A balanced approach that supports domestic producers without overly isolating the U.S. from international trade is key. Consumers also play an essential role in this equation. When choosing goods, particularly agricultural products, consumers are not merely selecting a product, they are effectively choosing the supply chain behind it. Opting for American-made goods directly supports domestic agriculture and the communities reliant upon it. Conscious consumer choices can send a powerful signal, encouraging companies to maintain and invest in U.S.-based production, thereby contributing to the overall health and stability of the nation's agricultural sector and the broader economy. Supporting local farmers and producers becomes a vote for the resilience of domestic agriculture. The confrontation between John Deere, a symbol of American agriculture, and former President Trump's America First policies highlighted deep-seated economic tensions. John Deere's decision to move some production to Mexico, announced earlier this year, caused a significant stir. This move, defended by the company as necessary to remain competitive in the global market through reduced operating costs and increased shareholder returns, was seen by Trump as a direct challenge to his agenda of keeping jobs within the U.S. The company later confirmed a $55 million investment in its Mexico plant, proceeding despite Trump's vociferous threats. Trump reacted fiercely, invoking his protectionist stance. He threatened to impose a 200% tariff on any John Deere products manufactured in Mexico and sold back into the U.S., framing it as a necessary measure to prevent the loss of American jobs and to penalize companies outsourcing production. He argued that John Deere, and any other company considering similar moves, was hurting American farmers and the manufacturing base. His ultimatum was clear: either build plants in the U.S. or face crippling tariffs. However, this stance seemed to overlook the complex realities of global supply chains and rising production costs within the U.S., which John Deere cited as primary drivers for its decision. The move to Mexico, from the company's viewpoint, was presented as a matter of survival in an increasingly competitive international landscape where U.S. labor costs, reportedly twice as high as in Mexico, pose a significant challenge. Adding another layer to this economic battlefield is the ongoing technological revolution transforming U.S. agriculture. Automation technology is progressively replacing traditional labor. GPS-controlled tractors, harvesting conducted by AI-powered machinery, and drones scanning fields are no longer futuristic novelties, but increasingly common realities. While this technology boosts efficiency, it also potentially displaces workers and presents a challenge to policies focused solely on preserving traditional manufacturing jobs. This technological shift interacts complexly with trade policies. Trump's protectionist measures, aimed at safeguarding existing jobs, appear somewhat misaligned with an industry rapidly evolving towards automation and requiring different skill sets. This focus on outdated economic models, critics argue, only deepens the divide within the agricultural sector, potentially hindering adaptation to global trends where competitors like Brazil, India, and China are also heavily investing in agricultural technology and expanding into emerging markets. John Deere, by embracing global production and potentially leveraging technology, proved it wasn't afraid to face pressure from Trump, signaling that American companies might need to expand globally, even if it contradicts domestic protectionist policies, simply to stay competitive. The fallout extends beyond agriculture, impacting the broader U.S. economy, particularly the auto industry. The sector has witnessed significant turmoil, exemplified by a staggering $219.5 billion loss, attributed partly to trade war impacts and supply chain issues. Car prices have soared, increasing by $15,000 to $30,000 in just 1 month, according to some reports, putting new vehicles out of reach for many consumers. This price surge is linked to tax measures and sanctions imposed by international partners, notably the European Union. The EU and China have effectively turned the tables. Germany, a leading EU member, has frozen the certification of U.S. electric cars, including models from Tesla, Ford, and GM, blocking their export to the massive European market of over 440 million consumers. This represents a severe blow to U.S. car manufacturers, directly affecting their profits and hindering industry growth as they lose access to a critical market. France has compounded this by imposing a carbon tax on heavier vehicles, over 1,814 kilograms, and those with engines exceeding 300 horsepower, specifically targeting popular American models like the Ford F-Series, Chevrolet Tahoe, and Hummer EV, rendering them unsellable in France. Canada has further complicated matters for U.S. automakers by joining forces with the EU through the Green Technology Access Partnership Agreement, reducing market opportunities for American cars in this close neighboring country. These actions harm the U.S. auto industry and decrease cooperation between the nations across various sectors. The situation is worrying, with reports suggesting that within just 3 weeks, the U.S. auto industry lost 200,000 jobs. Workers in manufacturing plants, technicians, and truck drivers face unemployment, creating a significant job crisis, particularly impacting states heavily reliant on the auto industry like Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky, which are now witnessing waves of factory closures and struggling local communities. The EU's response to U.S. tariffs and protectionist measures has been strategic and impactful, moving beyond simple retaliation. Instead of just targeting steel or specific goods, the EU went straight for America's Achilles heel: big tech, the sector representing American pride and significant profit. Europe doesn't boast its own equivalents like a Google of Brussels or an Apple Europe edition, yet it controls the regulatory playground. This time, the EU didn't resort to minor penalties. They tightened the regulatory noose. No overt aggression, just the power of law. Key legislative tools include the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and the EU Data Act. The message was crystal clear: our data, our rules. Big tech giants now face stringent requirements. Google is pressured to share its algorithms. Amazon is restricted from exporting warehouse insights. And Meta, Facebook, Instagram, might have to share user emotion data with European rivals. Furthermore, the EU is implementing digital taxes, looking squarely at where companies like Google, Meta, and Apple generate revenue, regardless of declared profits. A 3% tax on total revenue is being applied, a significant measure meaning substantial payments are due simply for operating within the EU market. For instance, Google earning $1 billion means paying $30 million just for market presence. This regulatory pressure is combined with sector-specific targeting focused on areas where America leads: AI, electric vehicles, and batteries. The EU demands transparency in battery sourcing, CO2 tracking for products, and even proof that AI systems are free from bias. They aren't blocking companies outright, but are burying them in clauses, subclauses, and footnotes, creating a complex web of compliance that constitutes a significant operational challenge and potential financial burden for U.S. tech companies. This represents a sophisticated counterstrike, cutting into profits without overt conflict. Japan's response to the trade tensions and U.S. tariffs has been notably quieter, but strategically astute, resembling a calculated game of chess. Recognizing the potential impact of tariffs, particularly on its significant auto sector, which holds over 35% of the U.S. auto market, worth around $50 billion annually, Japan initiated proactive measures dating back to 2018, preparing for a potential return to trade protectionism. Instead of engaging in direct confrontation, Japan focused on strategic diversification and technological advancement. Toyota invested $5 billion in hybrid vehicle production within Japan, specifically targeting exports towards Europe and Southeast Asia, thereby bypassing potential U.S. tariff impacts while catering to markets with growing demand for fuel-efficient vehicles. Honda expanded its production facilities in Thailand, where it already operates 3 major plants producing up to 300,000 vehicles per year, and explored new investment opportunities in Vietnam. Nissan planned the launch of a budget-friendly electric vehicle, the EV Leaf 2025, priced around $20,000, a competitive move in a segment where many U.S. automakers struggle. These moves weren't panicked reactions, but part of a long-term strategy. Japanese automakers also focused on strengthening their existing advantages. They leveraged their reputation for vehicle durability, fuel efficiency, and lower maintenance costs, factors that maintained consumer preference even as tariffs potentially increased prices. Japanese car prices in the U.S. did jump by 5 to 10% following the tariffs, and delivery times lengthened, yet American car sales didn't spike correspondingly, as consumers continued to favor the perceived value and reliability of Japanese models. Furthermore, Japan forged deeper alliances with the European Union, aligning on strict environmental standards, which matched Japan's existing strengths in hybrid and fuel-efficient technologies. They heavily invested in cutting-edge manufacturing technology, including automation and advanced production lines, to enhance efficiency and maintain quality without necessarily relying on U.S.-based production. They also explored alternative energy sources to power their plants, reinforcing their commitment to sustainability. As one Japanese executive subtly put it, "We don't need to put out fires. We just make sure they never reach the engine." This quiet, decisive strategy has allowed Japanese automakers to navigate the trade disputes effectively, maintaining market share and positioning themselves for future growth by focusing on technology, strategic global positioning, and aligning with international standards, effectively outmaneuvering the more direct tariff approach. The impact of these trade disputes extends significantly into the U.S. aerospace industry, particularly affecting Boeing, a cornerstone of American manufacturing and exports. China's decision, reported by Bloomberg News, to order its airlines to halt deliveries of all Boeing aircraft and stop purchasing parts from U.S. companies, is a direct retaliatory measure within the ongoing trade war. This move poses a substantial threat to Boeing, which relies heavily on the Chinese market. Boeing's global order book currently stands at around 4,500 aircraft, with approximately 1,200 of those orders originating from Chinese airlines. This represents a significant portion, between 26 and 28%, of the company's total orders. Losing these contracts could result in a devastating revenue loss for Boeing, estimated to be as high as $12 billion annually, and potentially reaching over $150 billion when considering the full scope of contracts and international partnerships through 2030. The financial implications are immense, potentially leading to a decline in the company's market value by up to $50 billion. However, the impact wouldn't be confined solely to Boeing's bottom line. It would send shockwaves throughout the extensive U.S. aerospace supply chain. Major companies like Spirit AeroSystems, Gulfstream, and Honeywell, along with thousands of smaller aircraft component suppliers distributed across the country, rely heavily on Boeing contracts. A significant drop in orders from China would force these suppliers to face serious challenges, including the possibility of substantial job cuts and even factory closures. Boeing employs around 140,000 people directly, with 30,000 workers involved specifically in aircraft manufacturing. A 1% drop in Boeing's profits could threaten thousands of these jobs. Furthermore, the U.S. aviation industry as a whole, a massive contributor to the national economy, exporting $130 to $140 billion in aerospace products annually, with China accounting for 15 to 18% of that, would feel the ripple effect. The decline in revenue from Chinese contracts could force the entire U.S. economy to pay a high price. This situation highlights the vulnerability of highly integrated global industries to geopolitical tensions and trade disputes, demonstrating how reliant major American corporations and their vast networks of suppliers are on international markets like China. This is truly a wake-up call regarding the dangers of over-relying on major trade partners and the devastating impact that can occur when diplomatic and trade tensions escalate. So, what does this complex web of corporate moves, tariff threats, and international responses mean? The situation involving John Deere, the broader agricultural sector, the auto industry, and aerospace giants like Boeing reveals the intricate and often fragile nature of the modern global economy. Trump's protectionist policies, intended to safeguard American jobs under the America First banner, appear to have triggered a series of unintended and often counterproductive consequences. The threat of high tariffs, while aiming to deter companies from moving production overseas, led to price increases for American consumers and farmers, strained relationships with key allies like the EU and Japan, and potentially accelerated the very job losses it sought to prevent, particularly in sectors reliant on global supply chains and markets. Companies like John Deere and Japanese automakers, faced with rising domestic costs and global competitive pressures, made strategic decisions to relocate production or diversify their markets, highlighting a potential clash between nationalist economic policies and the realities of international business. Their ability to adapt, invest in technology, and forge new alliances suggests that simply imposing tariffs may not be enough to retain industries within U.S. borders if underlying cost structures and global market demands favor alternatives. Furthermore, the strategic responses from the EU and China demonstrate a shifting global power dynamic. They are no longer passive recipients of U.S. policy, but are actively using regulatory tools, targeted sanctions, and strategic investments to protect their own interests and challenge U.S. economic dominance, particularly in high-value sectors like technology and advanced manufacturing. The EU's focus on data governance and digital taxes, Japan's quiet investment in future-proof technologies and diversified production hubs, and China's direct halt of Boeing orders all signify a multipolar world where economic leverage is wielded more assertively. For the U.S., the path forward seems fraught with challenges. The agricultural sector faces immense pressure from both internal cost increases and external market volatility. Key manufacturing industries like automotive and aerospace are caught in the crossfire of trade disputes, facing potential market share losses, job cuts, and supply chain disruptions. Recovering requires a multi-pronged approach. Targeted support for struggling domestic sectors, particularly small farms and businesses, strategic investment in technology and domestic supply chain resilience, and a nuanced recalibration of trade policies that acknowledges global interdependence while protecting national interests. Ultimately, the unfolding events serve as a stark reminder that economic decisions, especially those involving tariffs and trade, have far-reaching and often unpredictable consequences, impacting not just corporations, but entire communities, industries, and the nations standing on the global stage. These are the complex realities we continue to monitor on our channel. Thank you for watching.